In today's video, we're checking out Bluetti's updated EB70s model. We'll go over the specs of this particular unit and also check out all the features and to see if it might be a worthy buy for you guys. As we take a look at the specs on the updated model, for the most part things are the same with a 32 amp hour battery that should give us about 716 watt hours, which we'll check that later, a lithium iron phosphate battery, and the ability to be charged up at 200 watts from either AC or DC like solar at a max of 8 amps. The rated power has been moved up from 700 watts to 800 watts with a 1400 watt surge, and the AC output is at 800 watt total no matter how you use it. And as far as USB ports, it does have USB-A with a 3 amp total, and then it does have USB-C outputs that can do up to 5 amps and 100 watts out. A cigarette lighter is provided with the maximum of 10 amps out, and then also some older style DC outlets, which these are kind of a little bit older and should probably be swapped out to something else. It does have a wireless charging pad with up to 15 watts, which honestly for today's standards is a little bit on the low side as well. When opening the Bluetti box, the first thing you'll see on top is you're going to see a little envelope with some information inside, and also another brown box, which this will have our cables, we'll go over that in a second, and our power station. Now the first thing you'll see is the manual and a warranty card. You'll want to read those, and then out of the brown box you'll have all of our connection cables with a wire strap as well, like MC4 cables, your cigarette lighter, and the AC power unit. When it comes to weight, the Bluetti EB70s isn't very heavy, coming in at just over 20 pounds. And when it does come to that manual, this really is something you should read. It has a lot of good information, but nobody really ever does. As we go over the front panel, we'll check out the DC side. This is simple to use. Just simply press and hold the button, it'll turn it on. And now you'll see that the USB-C sides, these ones can provide 100 watts out each for a total of 200 watts, which that's actually pretty good. The USB-A's are there, and then these older style DC ports, which again, those are kind of old and should be replaced. And then you do have the cigarette lighter, which this is actually still kind of nice because I still have items I can plug in to this and still utilize them. So I don't mind having that, but I don't need the older style DC ports. Go ahead and press off that button. It'll turn off the whole unit, and you can move to the AC side by simply pressing and holding the button, and that'll turn on our AC power ports, which this will allow us to use up to 800 watts total max, as you can see there. And then you can also see the display, which I'm not too fond of this because it says it in 20% increments as far as your charge level. And that's kind of a big gap. I'd like to see 5% or 10%, but either way, it's just what it is. You also have your input meter, which is right here. So when it's plugged into either solar or AC, it'll show you how many watts are coming in, and your output watts, which is right there. And then another thing I noticed I didn't kind of like is the screen going off so quickly. I wish it would stay on just a little bit longer, but you can turn it on by simply tapping the button. It comes back on, but it seems to only stay on for about 30 seconds. One cool feature is this LED light. This is extremely bright. This is in the low setting and it doesn't use hardly any power. As you can see here, it uses 1 watt, which means it can stay on for literally days. And then when you put it into the higher position, which again is extremely bright, it only uses 2 watts, so again it can last for a long time. And it also has an SOS mode, which this hardly draws any power as well. So if you happen to be stranded in the middle of nowhere, you can literally let this thing flash for days on end. Now when charging up the unit using AC power, you have to use this kind of bigger, bulky AC power box, which I'll show you something here in a second. So when you plug this in, even when it's not connected to the unit, you hear the fan that comes on. Now this is something I was wishing they would have fixed from the previous model. So that fan will just sit there and continue to run regardless if it's plugged into anything, and it's not even hot yet, and it's not even hot in my shop. So one thing too is that this thing here will draw power that's unnecessary. So as soon as I plug in the unit into the Bluetti power station, another thing that happens is you can also hear the fan come on the power station when it hasn't even been plugged in yet. So this is another item I thought was a little bit oversensitive because it's just kind of wasting power when it's not even warm. So the fan comes on the power block, and the fan comes on the Bluetti station as well. But you can see it is starting to charge up. About 190 watts are now going in. And so one thing we will check is also how much power is going into this as compared to maybe using this right here. So this kilowatt meter gives us a little information. So right now 230 watts are going in, and it's about 121.5 volts at about 1.9 amps roughly. And we can actually figure out that information too if we multiply the numbers. And you can see here it's still about 121.3 volts at 1.88 amps. And if you kind of look at those numbers and multiply them together, you get 228 watts. So the meter for the most part is pretty accurate. But then you kind of come over here and you notice it says 191 watts going in. Your efficiency isn't very good, because at 190 watts there and about 230 there, that's about 40 watts. It's not making it to the power station. And again, when you unplug this thing from the unit, the power box will just kind of continue to run, and it just is unnecessary power. Look at the watt meter. You can see that it's burning 5 watts unnecessarily, and it'll never shut off. It'll just sit there and continue to run. So that's something they definitely need to fix, because what if you weren't paying attention to this and you left it plugged in for days? Even when you unplug it, the capacitors will kind of take a second to die, but there it goes. Now, if you want to charge your power station more efficiently, you should take a look at the Bluetti Foldable 200 watt solar panel. This is actually really nice. It's got integrated clips to hold it together, and then this pouch, which is where you can keep extensions, but this is actually where you'll find your cables, and these are good quality. And another thing they added was the technical details. They actually printed it right onto the back of the panel, so you know all the specs right away. The MC4 connectors look like they're good quality as well, better than some of the other ones I've seen on other panels. And they're using a 12 gauge wire, which this is just fine for the short distance that you're going to run these, because it is really meant to be plugged into a power station that's not going to be too far away from the panel. So the 12 gauge wire is just fine for this application. This foldable solar panel also has integrated legs or kickstands in it that has actually got a cool little function. You can just unsnap it and then snap it into a desired position to change the angle of the solar panel, and it's just kind of a quick adjustment. So I kind of like this setup. So we're going to go ahead and take it outside and we'll show you what it looks like. And so here's the solar panel opened up and kind of aimed at the sun, and I'll show you what it looks like while it's charging up the Bluetti EB70. So I have the unit back here charging up, and we'll take a look at some of the numbers and what it's supposed to get when it's being charged with solar. Now this panel is supposed to put out about 20.9 volts and also 9.7 amps. And if we take a look here at some of the numbers that we're getting about 160 watts. Our voltage is darn near there at 20.6. And then our amps is about 7.75, but the Bluetti can only take a max of 8 amps. So the MPPT controller is probably backing it off a little bit and only allowing about 7.75 amps in at about 150 watts on the box and about 160 or so, give or take, on the PowerWorks meter that we have. So I brought the unit back in to charge up on AC power, and it's actually been fully charged for probably a half hour, maybe 45 minutes. And again, that box is just running. So if you were to leave this plugged in overnight, that box will just continue to run overnight, charging you money and power. So I really think that's something that they need to definitely fix, but we'll go ahead and test some things out. When you're looking at the wireless charging pad that's on top, it only does 15 watts. And again, that's pretty low for today's standards when charging some of these newer phones that can handle 45 watts and more. It does kind of work. It's not the greatest, especially if you have a thicker case. If you look at mine, this is a super thin case. If you have a thicker one on here, it's probably not going to charge it, because most of them don't, because the signal just can't penetrate through when you have some of the bulkier cases that are on today's phones. So we're going to move on and try a surge watt test using this 800 watt heater, which is max for the power station. And we'll use that little kilowatt meter to kind of show you a pre-test. So what I'm going to do is plug this in and we'll see how much draw this thing takes while it's actually kind of warming up, and then how it actually settles back down. So watch the wattage as it kind of kicks up. It's going to go all the way above 1,000 watts. We get to about 1130, and now it's going to swing back down the other way. And this is where that surge is going to have to be able to take over to see if it can sustain it. But these power stations, a lot of times the surge protection is like 3 seconds or less. So we'll see if it can even run this. I'm not sure if it will. It's going to be really close, considering it's taking a little while to get back down to 800 watts, which this will settle about 775. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get this started and see if this can actually run the unit. So we'll fire up the AC side, let this power up, and I don't have it in the eco mode. This has an eco mode. I'm not 100% sure what it actually does, but we'll go and turn on the heater. And there it goes. Now we'll see how long it... Now, actually, it just kicked off right away. So look at that overload. So it didn't even try to run it for a second or two. It was almost immediate that it shut it off. I was kind of surprised at that. It looks like we're just going to kind of abort this test, because it's not even going to try to run an 800 watt heater. So We're going to go ahead and move on to the capacity test now. And so I got this plugged in so we can top it off. That way it's fully charged. And we're going to use a kilowatt meter, and also we're going to use a 350 watt heater to provide our load and to see how long it'll actually run it. And I like using heaters and stuff because this provides kind of a real world test while utilizing everyday products that are out there versus using a specified load tester at a certain rate. So we're going to go ahead and get this all fired up, and I have the kilowatt meter hooked up. We'll go ahead and turn this on, and now we'll let it boot up all the way before we turn it on. As we look at the voltage there, you can see it says 112 volts, which this actually seems a little bit low compared to some of the other, power stations that are out there that'll have about 122, 118. But anyway, we'll move on, and I'll keep track of basically the amps and show you guys that, and also along with how many kilowatt hours and the runtime as well that the power station gives us. So we'll go ahead and turn this on real quick. I'm going to set this to the wattage so we can see it and compare it to the one that's on the screen there. And so we'll go ahead and fire this up. So now you see the 90 degrees on the heater, and you see a little bit of voltage drop as we go back to the wattage now and see that kick up. And we'll go ahead and turn that screen on, which that thing is kind of finicky sometimes. But anyway, now that we look at the difference, you can see almost a little bit above 500 watts, 472 there as it starts coming back down. And they are off just a little bit, but for the most part, it's close enough for the test. And so we're going to let this run for a while, and I'll check on it periodically just to kind of show you guys. And this should stabilize right at about 320 to about 325 watts. And so we'll see what the difference is when they settle a little bit later. All right, so we're about 80% through the test as far as capacity, with about 450 watt hours being used. And the wattage difference is only being about 10 off for the most part. So we're going to go ahead and skip ahead again. All right, so now you can see that the battery light is actually on, and there's no more bars left in the battery monitor itself, which now this is where I don't know if it's going to run for a few minutes or if it's going to run for another half hour. But you can see as we take a look at the voltage, it's 112 volts, sustaining right there at 313 watts, 2.9 amps, and 326 and 313 on the screen. And if you look at the hertz, it's at 60.1, which actually on this particular unit, you can change that right there through the settings of 50 hertz. So make sure that that's at the correct hertz. And if you look at our total amount of kilowatts, it's at 0.58 or 580. And our runtime is at 1 hour and 47 minutes so far. And so I'm just kind of curious as to how much longer this is going to run. But anyway, we'll go ahead and switch this back over to the kilowatt hours, and then I'll switch back when the unit actually does shut down. And there we go, it shuts off at just about 580 kilowatt hours, give or take, of the 716 kilowatt hours it's rated for. So you're about 135 short of what it's rated for, but because of certain things like the BMS management system, the fans and everything else, and the display, as you can see here, the 716, you're never really going to get spec out of these power stations. It's going to be close. But let me know what you guys think about this particular unit in the comments down below, and let me know what you think about the test. Anyway, I hope you guys liked the video. Be sure to like and subscribe, and until then, I hope to see you guys next time.